which gives us some real clear delineations on what's going to shift labor demand around, right? This is not going to be hard to figure out, right? Because there's only a couple pieces going on here. So things that change the output prices or the marginal productivity of labor are going to shift our demand for labor, right? Because those are the only two components that go in here, right? How much do you get to sell your stuff for, and how much more stuff people make for you when you hire them? In order for our labor demand to shift, one of these things has to shift because that's the only thing in there, right? So that's going to drive our labor demand. And in a second, we're going to figure out how we can think about this shifting labor demand around. When we match this up with labor supply, which of course is determined based on that time trade-off, that will give us the equilibrium price of labor, which is the wage. So you put this labor demand together with labor supply, you get the total amount of labor traded, if you care for that, right? Or how many people are hired, how much time people are hired for, etc. One interesting result that we get out of this, and we'll explore this a bit more next time, is that we end up with a wage that's equal to price times the marginal productivity of labor, which, if you recall, is how much additional value someone provides, how much additional revenue you get as an employer from hiring somebody. This is sort of like saying labor is paid what the marginal worker provides in value, which may or may not be actually true. We'll talk about that next time. But for now, we're going to say in the simple world where this is true, because I mean, you're willing to pay somebody whatever they bring you in value. So you sort of end up in this nice little sunny world where people get paid what the value that they provide. All right, so we figured out our labor demand curve, we figured out our labor supply curve. Let's go into our labor demand curve and figure out what's going to shift it around. So we already know that labor demand is based only on price and the marginal productivity of labor. So in order to think about what's going to shift labor demand around, we got to think what's going to shift these things around. Okay. So changes in the prices of goods. So if P changes, P is the price of what we are selling, then we would expect, then naturally price times marginal productivity of labor is going to change. If the thing that we're selling gets more expensive, we're going to want to hire more people so that we can make that thing, right? So if the market for labor depends on the markets for the good that are being produced using that labor. Makes sense. You want to make, if your prices go up, you want to make more of something. That's what the regular old market supply curve is all about. What prices go up, your quantity supplied is going to go up. You need to hire more people to cover that quantity supplied. So you're going to be willing to pay people more so you can cover it. This is also one reason why you might expect the supply curve would slope upward. If you want to expand your production, you got to pay people more. So you got to be willing to maybe raise your wages and pay them more in order to hire the people that you need. If the price of cars goes up, car factories are going to want to hire more people to make those cars, even if the wage does not change. That's the definition of a supply shift. This is something that's going on right now. As prices for a lot of things go up, you want to hire a bunch of people so you can sell those things that are now at high prices, which is, we would expect to shift labor demand to the right. And that's going to be another thing that should shift wages up. So demand for food delivery, thinking about that, that is one example of one thing that became a lot more desirable during the pandemic, especially the early period of the pandemic, was food delivery, right? Price for delivery went up. I don't know if you noticed, but the fees that they charge on some of those delivery apps did go up a little bit. Restaurants did have to take smaller payments as well. Wages went up in that way too. That was the apps had leverage in that way. And doing this, raising those prices made it worthwhile for the delivery services to hire more people. Price of delivery services went up, which means that those delivery services wanted to hire more people to cover that because the value of it was higher. So labor demand went up in the delivery services industry as well. You can definitely see it now in trucking, right? The value of trucking has gone up. The price of trucking and shipping in general has gone way, way up. So they're trying really, really hard to hire as many people as they can to drive trucks. We'll see if they manage to do it. Changes in technology is going to be another thing that shifts the labor demand curve around. We talked about this as well on the supply curve side of a regular old production process, right? It changes your production technology is going to shift your supply curve around, but it will also change the marginal productivity of labor, and it could be in different directions. So as technology changes, and this could be actual technology, like you get a better machine or a better software or whatever, or like, the technology of better business practices or trade secrets or whatever it is, anything that changes how much value somebody can produce for you as a worker is going to change the marginal productivity of labor, right? As you can get more profit from a worker, that worker becomes more valuable, which is going to change the marginal productivity of labor and thus change the demand curve. Imagine you learned a new management secret that made each worker twice as valuable as they used to be, or twice as productive. If that was the case, you'd want to hire way more workers because they're way more productive now, right? Every worker you hire is going to be super productive. They're going to make you a lot of money, so you're going to want to hire as many as you can. You're going to be willing to pay more to do it because they're producing a lot of value. Now, this has an interesting case because additional technology can make your marginal productivity of labor go up or down sometimes. It depends on how the technology is complementary or substitution for the kind of work that people are doing. This is a common fear that you hear a lot, and it used to be more of a discussion a couple of years ago. It becomes a discussion every once in a while, and then economists always say, don't worry about it, and then it goes away. I think we tend to be right about this one as economists. But so one concern that people often have is new technology taking over jobs that used to be done by people. And this is clearly something that has happened many, many, many times in our history. One of the current concerns is about trucking. Are automated trucks going to take over the trucking industry that employs millions of people? Maybe, but let's think about what's going to happen. So when we think about a new technology that enters into a space that can make people, the real question is it going to make those people more or less productive? That's the real question. It's not, does that new technology do the same thing as the people? It's, does that technology make those people more productive or less productive relative to the technology? So here's an example, ATMs. So when ATMs were introduced, people assumed it was the end of bank tellers. That bank tellers would all get fired because we have these ATMs now that are much cheaper to operate. That was the idea, right? Because at the time, you would go to a bank teller for everything, right? You wouldn't just go to a bank teller to try to get a loan or whatever, but you would go to the bank teller to withdraw money or put in money or get a new box of checks or whatever it was. Anything that you did with your bank, you would wait in line for a bank teller every single time. So ATMs come in, they can do pretty much a lot of these services, most of the services that you would use a bank teller for, but much, 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 much cheaper, right? You don't need to hire somebody, you don't need to pay their insurance, you don't need to do whatever. So the real question though, in the question of are ATMs going to kill the bank teller or not, is do ATMs make the marginal productivity of labor of a bank teller higher or lower? Well, what happens when you take an ATM and the ATM can now do the most routine and lowest profit margin tasks that a bank teller used to do? Suddenly, the bank tellers are only spending their time on high value things, which actually makes the bank tellers more valuable than they were before, not less, right? So now that the bank tellers no longer have to spend their time with basic things like deposits and withdrawals, everything they do is now more valuable. So the marginal productivity of labor of bank tellers actually went up after the introduction of ATMs. And today there are just about as many bank tellers as there were before the introduction of ATM. It has not really changed all that much. We'll see if the internet banking changes that. That could be a thing. I can imagine that making the marginal productivity of labor lower. But ATMs at least didn't do it, right? Even though they replaced a huge portion of the tasks that bank tellers used to do. And this is a story that we see a lot over and over and over again, where new technology comes in that replaces a lot of the tasks that somebody used to do, and everyone gets scared, they're all going to lose their jobs, but in fact, they just shift their time to more valuable parts of the job. Now, granted, this does sometimes mean that people who cannot do those higher value things end up with jobs, and it's different people with the new jobs. That can happen. So, for example, if automated trucking means that you still need people to drive the trucks, but only treacherous mountain ranges or something like that, then it's really going to shift the labor demand away from people who can't drive those mountain ranges and toward people who can. That could happen, which can be disruptive. But in terms of the actual labor demand, the overall number of people you want to hire might not change, might even go up. Another great example of this is accountants. On the next slide. No. Oh, yes. Another great example of this is accountants. Right? Raise your hand if you're thinking about being an accountant. Anybody in this room? Accounting major? All right, nobody. But let me tell you, it's a much more interesting job than it used to be. If you were an accountant 40 years ago, you would have spent pretty much all of your time filling out spreadsheets. And I don't mean working in Excel. I mean literally by hand. You have a giant spreadsheet of paper on your table, and you would do the Excel work by hand, one cell at a time, doing the math all day, every day, for the rest of your life. That's what you did as an accountant, right? So imagine you use Excel now and you're like, okay, subtract this number from that number, update it automatically when you do it. No, that would be by hand. Then they invented a spreadsheet, right? The computerized spreadsheet, which is vastly faster at doing that with much less error. So everyone pretty much figured, okay, well, accountants are just done. Like, who's going to need an accountant anymore? But again, this freed up accountants to only spend their time on the valuable work, right? So instead of spending all their time filling out a spreadsheet, it allowed them to spend the same amount of time providing a lot more accounting services, a lot more valuable accounting services to a lot of people. Instead of, say, one person being necessary to manage the accounts of a small business, now one accountant could manage the accountants of several businesses, right? It makes them much more productive. And so their work is now more valuable, and in fact, you'd expect them to get paid more. And in fact, the number of accountants that we have has risen since the introduction of spreadsheets. Interesting piece of trivia, the very first spreadsheets came out before computers had arrow keys. And so in order to go from one cell to another, they would hook up Pong controllers, for the video game Pong. And so you turn the little dials to go up and down and left and right. It's kind of neat. So the question when new technology comes into an area is not, is this machine doing what I do? But rather, does this machine make the value of my time higher or lower? Or does it not affect it at all? And if you can't answer that question, then you don't really have an idea of whether new technology will make you more valuable as a worker or less valuable. For me, one good question of this is, how is the internet going to affect the market for college professors, right? Because now you could all get, a lecture from the top minds of the world who will put their lectures online and maybe be better than me at doing it. Will that make my time more valuable as I can just focus on like one-on-one interaction as opposed to having to prepare lectures and do grade assignments and things like that? Or will it make my time less valuable because you don't need me to do this whole lecturing thing? You don't necessarily know. I suspect it's probably going to be more of the former, but we'll see. So anytime we have any sort of automation question coming in, this is the question to really ask.